In 700 years of French kings, the Church has canonized exactly one, not the one who won the most battles. He lost his crusade, lost his army, and died of dysentery in the dirt outside Tunis. They canonized him because of what he did with power when no one could make him do anything. Louis IX was crowned King of France at Reims in 1226. He was 12 years old. A 12-year-old with a crown is a hostage to everyone around him, except this one had Blanche of Castile for a mother. She ran the kingdom as regent, put down the barons who smelled weakness, and formed her son with one sentence that he repeated for the rest of his life. Jean de Joinville, his friend, his seneschal, the man who wrote down what he saw, records it. She told the boy she loved him more than anything on earth, and she would still rather see him dead at her feet than have him commit one mortal sin. Sit with that. That is not a pious decoration. That is a mother teaching a future king the actual ranking of catastrophes. Losing a province is recoverable. Losing your soul is not. Every decision Louis made for the next 40 years runs on that arithmetic. So the man the boy became looked like this. Mass every day, often twice. The divine office, the church's daily cycle of psalms. Prayed like a monk in a palace. Regular confession. And a table with a standing arrangement. Poor men fed daily at his own hall, and the accounts of his household show him serving them himself. The King of France carrying the dishes. The world calls that eccentric. Louis called it the job. Because if Christ is actually king, and Louis believed it the way you believe in gravity, then an earthly crown is middle management. Here is the part they should teach in every civics class in America. In 1247, Louis was preparing to leave on Crusade. A man about to leave his kingdom for years has a choice: leave quietly or find out what his own government has been doing in his name. Louis created a new kind of royal official, the enquêteurs, investigators. Their assignment: ride through the realm, take testimony from ordinary people, and hear every complaint against the king's own officers. And to make sure the investigators couldn't be bought by the men they were investigating, he staffed the mission heavily with Dominican and Franciscan friars, men under vows of poverty. You cannot bribe a man who owns nothing on principle. Understand what this is. This is the most powerful man in France building an internal affairs division against himself, 7 centuries before any constitution required it of anyone. Where the enquêteurs found abuse, restitution followed, and the findings fed a written code of conduct for royal officials. No gifts, no side dealing, no using the office to get rich. The same instinct reformed his courts. Louis pushed judicial duels, trial by combat, the old superstition that God referees sword fights, out of royal justice, and moved his courts toward evidence, testimony, appeal. Joinville describes him in summer sitting under an oak at Vincennes, hearing the cases of ordinary subjects himself, no marshals filtering who got through. And Europe noticed. When the King of England and his own barons went to the edge of civil war, both sides asked Louis to arbitrate. The enemy king, trusted as a judge because his justice was not for sale. That is allegiance, men, not flags. A man ordering the power he actually holds. His house, his work, his word, under a law he did not write. We do not have to guess what Louis thought the crown was for. He wrote it down. Near the end of his life, he composed his enseignements, his instructions, for his son Philip, the heir, a king's private succession memo. No audience, no spin. And the first instruction is not about armies, alliances, or money. The first thing he tells his son is to love God with all his heart, and to prefer any suffering to mortal sin. His mother's sentence, handed down a generation, now in the father's handwriting. He tells Philip, if God sends you prosperity, thank him for it in humility. Do not, by pride, make war on the God who gave it. If God sends you adversity, accept it with patience and ask what he is correcting. He tells him to be just before he is loved, to hold the balance even when it costs him, even against himself. If a poor man has a case against a rich man, sustain the poor man's side until the truth is clear. He tells him to keep good men around him and to be slow to believe flattery. Joinville records the standard Louis set in conversation too. He once asked his friend which he would rather be, a leper or a man in mortal sin, Joinville, a soldier, an honest man, answered honestly, he would rather commit 30 mortal sins than be a leper. Louis took him aside later and corrected him the way a father corrects a son he respects. There is no leprosy as hideous as mortal sin, because the leper's body dies once and the soul in sin is already dead. This is a king doing succession planning, and the entire estate he is transferring is the fear of God. The kingdom is a footnote. Fathers, that is the enseignements test for your own house. If you wrote one page for your son tonight, what would be first on it? Whatever is first on that page is what you actually believe the family business is. Now the part that breaks the success gospel version of faith. Louis took the cross twice. The 7th Crusade, 1248, he sailed for Egypt with the best supplied army of the age, took the port of Damietta, and then the campaign came apart at Mansurah. Disease tore through the ranks, the retreat collapsed, and the King of France was taken prisoner, the anointed king, in chains, ransomed back for a sum that staggered the treasury. Here is what he did with the humiliation. He did not slink home. He sailed to the Holy Land and spent 4 years fortifying what could be held, negotiating the release of prisoners, doing the unglamorous logistics of a cause that had already cost him everything a king is supposed to protect. 20 years later, he tried again. The 8th Crusade, 1270. It never even reached the Holy Land. Camp fever and dysentery went through the army outside Tunis in the August heat, and this time it took the king. He died on the 25th of August, 1270, at 56, laid, at his own instruction, on a bed of ashes spread in the shape of a cross. His confessor, who was in the tent, recorded that he died at 3 in the afternoon, the hour his king died. Tradition adds that he was heard repeating the name of the city he never reached, Jerusalem. The confessor doesn't record it. The tradition kept it anyway, because it was true of the whole man, even if no one can prove it of the final hour. 2 crusades, 2 failures, a captivity, a ransom, a fever, a grave that started in enemy territory. And 27 years later, 1297, the church looked at that record and canonized him, because the church has never once canonized a win-loss record. She canonizes fidelity. Louis is a saint for exactly the reason your worst season doesn't disqualify you. God was not grading the outcome. He was grading the allegiance. Now the detail this whole episode has been walking toward. In Louis's century, something new was moving through the church. The Franciscans and Dominicans had built something for people the monasteries could never take. Lay people, married men, men with trades, debts, children, a third order after the friars and the nuns, for men and women who would stay in the world and still live under a rule. Set prayer, set fasts, honest dealing, peace in their quarrels. A rule of life for ordinary men in their own homes. And when the church later looked for a patron saint to set over that whole way of life, she did not choose a friar, she reached for a king. St. Louis IX is the patron of the third order, the layman's rule, to this day. Tradition even claims him as a member. The paper trail for that is thinner than the devotion, and honesty says so. But the patronage itself is the verdict, and it is the whole point. The man with the most power in Christendom lived like a man under a rule written for men with none. Daily prayer that did not move for weather or war. A rule for his money, a rule for his justice, a rule for his tongue. Rank did not exempt him. Rank is exactly what needed the rule, which closes every excuse you and I have. You will never hold his power, and you will never have his excuse. If the King of France could keep an ordinary man's rule, an ordinary man can. Some of you are on day 4 of a 40-day rule right now. St. Michael's Lent, the old fast from the Assumption to Michaelmas. You already know the secret Louis knew. The rule doesn't cage the man, it aims him. And if you have no rule at all, that is the actual first step. Not more intensity, order, a time you pray that doesn't move. A standard for your work, a page for your son. The kingdom is your house. Govern it like a saint governed France. His feast is next Tuesday, August 25th, 756 years to the day since a king died on a cross of ashes, still facing Jerusalem. St. Louis of France, king, father, and man under the rule, pray for us, altar, arms, allegiance.